Welcome. We are talking about ecological tolerance today. This is topic 2.4. Alrighty, ecological tolerance refers to this range of abiotic conditions. So when we're talking about abiotic, we're talking about non-living conditions in which a species can survive. So all species have these ranges, these particular ranges of different abiotic conditions they can handle. Temperature, humidity, salinity, pH, dissolved oxygen, sunlight, etc. We know that some creatures can handle warmer ranges of temperatures, others can handle lower ranges of temperatures, and they're going to thrive in that certain environment. However, if that factor gets too low, or if that abiotic factor gets too high, then they're either going to have to adapt, migrate, or they'll go extinct. So, for example, the species to species can vary, or it could be individual to individual. It can be genetic based also. If you look at this within humans, melanin is a great example. Some are more able to withstand large amounts of UV rays, others are not, and that's based on our melanin. So, here we go. Polar bears. They're adapted to live in the cold Arctic. They would die in the heat of the tropics and have to adapt or migrate. Where our sun bear lives in the jungles of Borneo, he would not be successful in the Arctic. We've also noticed that sometimes this ecological tolerance varies throughout the lifetime. So an example here is salmon. Salmon are very adapted to living in fresh water. They do a lot of growing and hunting in this fresh water. But as they get older and turn into adults, they're going to move into salt water. So their tolerance for salinity is quite low when they're living in the freshwater as a juvenile, but it's quite high when they're an adult. And the adult, they need that salinity. So when they don't have it anymore, it becomes an issue. All right, now each species or individual, remember it could be separated both in species or individual, has this thing called a tolerance range. This is a very important slide here. I like to call this the Goldilocks slide. Goldilocks, she's hunting for the perfect situation. That's what we're looking at here. We're looking for this optimal range. When we're in this optimal range, our species are going to be abundant. So this graph here is measuring the range and it's measuring the amount of species. When the abiotic factor is too low, we can't tolerate that little amount. So there is very few species down here, almost to a point what we call the zone of intolerance, where species are absent. Then, when we have that abiotic factor too high, we've reached our upper limit. And we also have a zone of intolerance where we can't handle it. Now, some individuals have been able to tolerate these higher or lower zones where they're being physiologically stressed. However, most importantly, this is the abundance. This is our optimum for that abiotic factor. It's our Goldilocks spot right in the middle where we have our most amount of species because we're in the optimum range for that abiotic factor. This is another graph that kind of just shows the same thing. So we're measuring population size versus the amount of that environmental factor. Again, that could be sunlight, salinity, temperature, wind, pH, etc. Our optimum range right here is going to lead to the highest amount of individuals, our most abundant amount of individuals. Individuals can handle, there are exceptions. They can handle a little bit too low and they can handle too high, but we're going to get to a point, the zone of inhibition, where there's no individuals at all. Now, also, we're going to see how some species are going to shift with the salinity. So here's an example. These are estuary species. Estuary species, if you notice, this is a lot wider. That means that estuary species are much more adaptive to the many variations in salinity. They can handle lower levels, higher levels, and then everything in between. So their range of tolerance is a lot wider, where for oceanic species, their range of tolerance is much more specific. It's much narrower, their tolerance range. Now, when we see a very narrow range for a species, this is most often means we have a specialist species. So here's an example. Our specialist species, it's a very narrow tolerance range. Now let's compare that to our generalist species, which are going to have very wide tolerance ranges. Generalist species are extremely adaptive, where our specialist species, they only eat certain types of foods. They only survive in certain types of environments and habitats. So if any of that is changed, they really cannot adapt to a wide range of that abiotic factor, where our generalist species can. This is a very important point, separating our specialist species from our generalist species when it comes to these tolerance ranges. So here's an example here. We have our blackstripe top minnow, very wide. This would be a generalist. Where this guy is more of a specialist because this is quite narrow. So this is wide, this is narrow. So therefore this is a specialist. It just reinforces the idea that every single individual or species has a range that it can tolerate for all of our abiotic factors that are out there. Now I'm going to show you one great example of I'm going to call her a specialist species in my family and what her ecological tolerance range is when it comes with temperature. Now this is my puppy Geneva. She is a Bernedoodle, known for living in the Bernese mountains, Swiss mountains. She hates heat. Her ecological tolerance for heat is very, very, very low. So this is her moping in the house this summer because it was so hot. This is the same dog who clearly has a much higher tolerance for colder temperatures. So her range is going to be more skewed towards colder temperatures than it is warmer temperatures. This is the little snow dog out covered in snow, and I would say it's got to be close to -5 degrees Celsius right now. But that is her preferred, her optimal condition for survival. Crazy dog.